It's absolutely right that Europe does need to step up and spend more on defence, and that we've made ourselves weak by being complacent about this. But also that America very deliberately in the post-war era made itself the world's greatest military superpower, and to just withdraw from that at very little notice is completely unreasonable, and redrawing the global order in this way is quite a terrifying prospect.
European leaders have approved a £78 billion loan to Ukraine to fund its military and its economy for the next 2 years. But some nations voted against unfreezing Russian assets to give directly to Ukraine, which could have added a further €200 billion. Speaking at the end of his end-of-year press conference in Moscow, Vladimir Putin criticised the EU for its pursuit of those frozen assets.
It was a real failure to take the assets. They cannot steal them, but they're trying. But still, they cannot do this. Well, stealing is not really correct definition for that. Stealing, this is when someone is doing it secretly, and they are doing it openly. This is a robbery. This is a robbery. Why they fail to do this? Why they failed to implement this robbery? Because the consequences can be really harsh for the robbers.
Yeah, robbery. Well, it didn't happen anyway. Michael, how disappointing do you think it is for President Zelensky that he's getting a loan and he's not getting unfrozen Russian assets to the tune of $200 billion?
Well, there's a lot less money in a loan, and that's the important thing, because Ukraine is going to run out of money very soon, April, they reckon, when it will, frankly, not have the money to continue the war. And to continue its own, economic activities. I think it's a very tricky one, because it's theoretical and technical. I mean, what is the difference between using the Russian assets as collateral or actually giving the Russian assets to Ukraine? What the Europeans seem to be now pretty worried about is that the Russians have said, understandably, if you take our assets, we'll take yours. And there's a precedent which the Americans are pushing. They don't like the idea of frozen assets being used, simply confiscated, because that could happen to other countries. American assets could be frozen somewhere and then simply taken over by a government. And it's a whole question of international law. Well, it does seem rather odd that we're talking about international law with a country that's actually going to war with another country. And I sort of wondered, what did we do about German assets in Britain during the Second World War? There must have been quite a lot of money in London was it frozen? Was it simply taken by the British? Was it repaid to Germany at the end of the war? I have no idea. And nobody really thinks about that now. It's an interesting dilemma for Europe.
Alys, it's a tricky one, isn't it? Because you kind of instinctively feel, as Michael was spelling it out, that because of very bad behaviour and the breach of international law by Putin, that we shouldn't be too prissy about breaching international law to seize these assets. But it is an important principle, isn't it, that money left in a bank can be left there, and you undermine that at your peril.
Yeah, it's an extremely important principle, as you say, that developed countries don't just expropriate other countries, and if they were to do so, it would seriously undermine investor confidence across the world. And there would also be a possibility that Russia could therefore weaponize the global financial system, which is the basis of all our prosperity, against ourselves. Because this idea was that Belgium could become bankrupt. It's got something like 30% of its GDP is in this bank in terms of Russian assets. So I do think it's a really invidious position we're in, because, of course, we need to keep funding this war because they're fighting it on our behalf. It's money now or it's blood later, as I think Donald Tusk said. But equally, you have to preserve the global financial system. That's what underpins our entire, our freedom.
It's a sort of compromise they've come to. I mean, it's interesting. Belgium stood out very strongly against it, and everyone thought, well, Belgium will roll over. It's such a pro-European. Its whole existence now is based on, going along with everything that the Europeans want to do. And the Prime Minister, who's a bit of a Flemish nationalist, stood up and said, no, not going to bankrupt Belgium, and we're not going to be made to pay the penalty if something happens. And I can understand his position, because if something did happen, or even if there was a deal, I think the Americans would not rescue Belgium from having to pay back all this money. The Americans certainly don't like this idea at all.
It's the Americans that have put Europe on the spot here, isn't it, Alys? Because, in the days when all this was starting out, I was in number 10. Trump was not in the White House. Joe Biden was. And Joe Biden wrote some pretty hefty checks and sent a lot of military hardware. And the reality, whatever you think of the rest of the changes, but the change from Biden to Trump has been a massive blow to the Ukraine.
Yeah, I mean, so two things I think about this. I think it's absolutely right that Europe does need to step up and spend more on defence, and that we've made ourselves weak by being complacent about this. But also that America very deliberately in the post-war era made itself the world's greatest military superpower, and to just withdraw from that at very little notice is completely unreasonable, and redrawing the global order in this way is quite a terrifying prospect. So, I think we have every right to be quite annoyed with America while also thinking that it's the right thing to do to defend ourselves.
Michael, you're saying 78 billion is useful, but it's not enough because of the daily cost of this war. How long till we have another, early hours discussion among European leaders and maybe one involving Britain to sort of try and come up with another tranche of cash?
Well, who knows? I mean, it depends whether the war continues with the same ferocity and the same intensity that it is going on now. I mean, there will be more attempts to get some kind of settlement. I think in the course of this coming year, there will be a deal on Ukraine. It's not going to be a deal that most Europeans would like at all. I'm afraid it's going to be a deal that effectively sells Ukraine down the river. But the Ukrainians are not much in a position to carry on without the cash they need. The Europeans probably can't come up with much more cash. The Americans certainly won't. And the Americans are determined to wash their hands of it, award a peace prize to Trump if he will say that he claims it, and say, that's right, that's all right, we've done the deal, peace is now there. And Putin rubs his hands, he's got more or less everything he wants. And I'm afraid I see that as the likely outcome sometime after Ukraine runs out of money.
Michael, you posed a question earlier about did the UK freeze and seize German assets, including money held in London banks during World War II. And I'm grateful for Dan Pike, who's written in to say, yes, absolutely, we did. This was done under the Trading with the Enemy Act and related wartime legislation. Key points. What happened? German government assets were frozen at the outbreak of war in 1939. Assets of German companies and nationals in the UK were placed under the control of the custodian of enemy property, and these measures were part of economic warfare to deny resources to the enemy. There's a lot more, but thank you very much, Dan, for sharing that.
Today, everybody can leave this meeting room victoriously. I think Ukraine has won. It received the urgent, predictable and reliable financing it needs for the next 2 years based on an EU borrowing on the capital markets backed by the EU budget headroom. This is not a fragile construct. This is a stable, legally robust and financially credible European solution. I think Europe has won. And financial stability has certainly won. We avoided chaos, we avoided division. Europe stayed united, and unity today means that Europe remains relevant at the geopolitical table. Fragmentation would have meant weakness and irrelevance, and we avoided that. We protected Europe's economic and financial credibility.